Hello, welcome to Confessions of a Frustrated Game Master. I am Robert, the narrator, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Confessions. So, this episode of Confessions, I'm going to talk about role-playing games, and I'll tell you exactly what I mean by that. So, many years ago, when I fell in love with this hobby, I fell in love with role-playing games. And my belief has always been when we sit down to play, if all we're going to do is combat and interact with the rules, why don't we just play a board game instead? Or if we're going to sit down and role play the entire time, do character interactions and portray the character's motivations and beliefs, why did I spend $60 on this rule book if all we're going to do is role play? Why don't we just do improv? Which I guess generally I'd be a lot more interested in playing a board game than sitting around the table with other adults and doing improv around the table. So that's what I mean when I say that I fell in love with role playing games. I fell in love with both aspects. When I'm playing and the situation calls for portraying your character in character interaction, in the back of my mind, I'm not thinking to myself, man, when is some more combat going to start? Because I love portraying my character. I always play in world as character. And when we're interacting with the mechanics of the game and we're doing a conflict, a combat, or just generally interacting with the mechanics, in the back of my mind, I'm not thinking, man, when are we going to do some more role playing? Because I love interacting with mechanics, and I never want to forget that I'm playing a game. Now, online, you'll hear a lot of talk about players, obviously talking about mechanics, comparing mechanics from one game with another game, and generally not really giving much credence to the role playing aspect the of role playing games. And you will also, on the channels that I watch, you will also hear a lot of discussion about games that pull players out of immersion with its mechanics. The mechanics remind the players that they are, playing a game. And of course, a lot of this video is going to talk about preference, but I am also going to give a couple of tricks and tips as to how this issue can be addressed. But yeah, there definitely is going to be a little bit of talk, or a lot of talk about preference. Now, as I always say, there is no right or wrong way to have fun. I am not in the business of the pointless um, effort to tell someone the way that they are having fun is wrong. That's really a pointless endeavor. But I will let you know what my preferences are and how you may address some of the issues that you may have. And as I said, I love both role playing and games. And I personally never want to not remember that I am playing a game because I love both. So here is the personal preference. I've been playing for a long time, and I started with a really rules heavy game. My first game was a game called Champions, the role playing game, probably one of the most complex role playing games out there. Now, the game made a lot of sense. The mechanics were cohesive. I don't feel like there were a ton of subsystems that makes a lot of games really difficult, and definitely there's only one task resolution mechanic. So though Champions was a really complex game, it was very cohesive. And even playing Champions, and this is my personal preference, I did not let that complex game hurt my immersion or pull me out of the game. Now, this is going to be something that everyone has their own opinion or tastes about. Everyone obviously have different things that they appreciate or don't appreciate and have ways of approaching. So it's easy for me to say that I have played the most mechanically complex games, and I never allow those complex mechanics to pull me out of immersion. Again, that's where the discussion about the discussion about preference comes in. I'm not saying that because I play complex games that don't allow myself to be pulled out of immersion that everyone can do that. But I can definitely tell you what my approach is. And maybe if you are at a table and you're playing a game that the rules remind you that you're playing a game and you don't like it and you don't feel like the game is allowing you to portray your character, I have some tips that could actually help you with that. So, the first thing that I want to address is the idea. I just came up with this thought a couple of days ago. How much of playing a particular game and the game forcing you out of being immersed in your character and portraying your character is the fault of the game master? I actually thought of this a couple of days ago, and I have definitely played um, under game masters who cared almost nothing about role playing, character portrayal, motivations, or beliefs. All they cared about was the mechanics side of the game. And I have to imagine that someone who is not like myself, who can feel immersed even with the most complex role playing games out there, players who are not like that, who don't make their own immersion, would have to feel when they're playing under a game master who doesn't do any role playing, doesn't care anything about character portrayals or character motivations and beliefs. It has to be hard for those players because every time they get going, the game master may just throw mechanics in their face or conflict or another combat. And very similarly, I have played at a table with players who, if I'm trying to role play or I'm trying to use diplomacy instead of violence to solve a problem, you see the guys at the table who really love mechanics looking at their watch. Hey guys, when are we going to have some combat? So it did occur to me, and I'd love to hear people's opinions in the description below. How many players may have thought that it was the mechanics of the game that is pulling them out of immersion and reminding them that they're playing a game, and didn't really look at the fact that the game master was not facilitating them being able to portray their character and do role playing at the table. How many of you out there who believe that the complex mechanics can pull you out of the game is actually suffering under a game master whose style is not like yours? Obviously, the way you solve that, like 99% of the issues in tabletop role playing game, sitting down, session zero, discussing it, being on the same page, or not sitting at the table with people who don't have the same play styles, is obviously the way that you can solve that problem. But when I say that I don't allow the mechanics of role playing games to pull me out of immersion, this is what I do. Even when I'm playing under game masters who have no appreciation for portraying characters or role playing. So what I find when I'm playing, and I'll be honest with you, I have Dungeons and Dragons is not a system that lends itself to encouraging role playing. And, that's going to probably infuriate a lot of people, but I don't care. That's my opinion. Like I said, I don't tell people how to have fun. So if you think that Dungeons and Dragons is the most role playing, inspiring tabletop game ever, then that is your belief. But I believe that Dungeons and Dragons has always encouraged conflict and combat and killing things and taking their stuff. But that's why I was so impressed with 5th edition. 5th edition is on my top 10 favorite RPGs of all time because of the motivation and background system added character to characters. So that's why I love 5th edition so much, because it definitely was a step in the direction of encouraging players to do more role playing and to portray their characters based on the characters' motivations and beliefs. But even during games like Dungeons and Dragons, I would interact with the other player characters or NPCs during travel time. When we are just traveling from place to place and making camp, I would have my character approach a player character or an NPC and have a conversation with them. So that is something that you can do. If you're playing a fantasy role-playing game and you guys are traveling and you may be in, random encounter mode or just traveling place to place, if you are a player who likes to do character interaction, and you may or may not be under a game master who does not appreciate that and is not giving you what you need, have your character approach other PCs in the game or other NPCs in the game and start a conversation. Talk to them about their beliefs. Talk to them about things that may have bothered your character, and that will inspire some great character interactions and some great role playing. Role play before the adventure starts, pretty much there's a lot of adventures out there that start with the player characters sitting around a tavern doing nothing, waiting for the adventure giver to come along. In those moments, role play, talk to NPCs, talk to player characters. Don't just sit there waiting to be given your next task. Fulfill your need to role play and interact with other characters in the game. Especially if your game master is not giving you those opportunities. And then finally, always make decisions based on your character's belief. Like for me, if you are the type of player who believes as portraying your character as a real, living, breathing individual in the world that you're playing in, I think you would get a lot of satisfaction out of always making decisions based on your character's beliefs. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again because it's so pertinent to the conversation. The height of role playing to me is when a player makes suboptimal decisions because that's what their character would do. Now, there's a lot of players out there who, there are a lot of players out there who don't like playing role-playing games. There are some players out there that like playing role-playing. They want to role-play all of the time and can easily be pulled out of immersion by mechanics. And there are players out there who don't want to play a role-playing game. They want to play game. So of those players out there who only want to play game and do mechanics and do combat, find it anathema, the idea that you would approach a situation based on what your character believes and not based on the most tactically sound thing to do or the most tactically sound thing to do based on the mechanics of the game. But if you are someone who wants to portray your character, who wants opportunities to role play, it's no easier way than to make sure that you make all of your decisions based on your character's beliefs. So those are the things that I do and why I say that in my personal preference, I have never come across a game that I feel like the mechanics of the game forced me out of immersion. Now, obviously, I don't like every role-playing game out there. So I have disliked role-playing games because I thought that the mechanics were too heavy or too clunky, or there were too many subsystems. But no matter how complex a role-playing game is, in my opinion, I don't allow it to pull me out of immersion. And maybe those couple of three steps that I gave you can make you also not allow a role-playing game to pull you out of immersion. So what do you think? Do you think that it's the mechanics of the game that harms your immersion uh, when you're sitting down to play? Or do you think that you may have overlooked the fact that you're playing with a game master who doesn't care for role playing, and the mechanics, and if they did, you could overcome the mechanics reminding you that you're playing a game? Let me know what you think about the subject in the comments below, and I'll talk to you later.